So the way how Donna Williams describes this process of how we develop and lose that capacity of sensing. But then we can just as well go back and tune into the system of sensing again. It just requires some exercising. Go into nature. Listen, feel, touch, hear, smell, everything. And just be in the present moment. And do it whenever you can, also with human beings. And see them as human beings. I think when everybody is so stressed, then they are not present. And nobody has empathy for nobody. But when we just stop and listen and feel, tune into each other and see each other as human beings, not making any discrimination between autistic or non-autistic or whatever. Just see each other as human beings, from one nervous system to the other. See the humanity in each other. I think that's the most important thing. Otherwise, when we always accuse each other, then this is a vibe of fight-flight, and it will cause stress for both. I don't think with accusations we get far. It's about having oneness and connecting, be present. You can also say from heart to heart, which sounds a bit cheesy, but I mean the middle heart, the middle dantian, the spiritual heart in the middle of the chest, where the thymus gland is. That's what I mean, from that place, connect and listen. And therefore, we create empathy for each other. The heart is the center of empathy and trust. So that's where we need to go in order to get each other, literally, with all our senses. And then there will be less miscommunication. I think it's as simple as that, or maybe as difficult for those who have really a difficulty to tune into that state of being, which is a right hemisphere parasympathetic state, rather than the left hemisphere state. And it's just another way of attending. And we just need to relearn to do that. Treat each other as human beings. That's all.
Cassandra syndrome actually comes from Greek mythology. Oh yeah. So Cassandra was cursed to speak only the truth, but never be believed. Can you imagine being cursed to speak only the truth, but not be believed? Actually, I can imagine it. I think it's called autism. So
what is this world that we're actually living in? It's not physical. It's not about the way flowers look. It's not about how many legs an animal has. It's not even about a teacup or a person. Really, on a building block level, we are all made up of exactly the same stuff, which isn't actually stuff, it's energy. But at a quantum level, Whether it's a leaf or a coffee mug or a person, we are just collections of quanta that come together to form atoms, which come together to form molecules, which come together to form increasingly complex beings. But at the fundamental building block level, we are all made up of exactly the same stuff. And so why wouldn't we be able to connect and communicate with other expressions of life? We are literally of the same energy. We are cut from the same cloth. We humans, having brains as we do, tend to think a lot, too much. And every thought or feeling has an electromagnetic consequence in our brain. Synapses fire, there are brainwave emissions, and these really have a frequency that can be perceived by any other aspect of the universe that tunes into us. Much like a cell phone tower or a radio tower that's constantly emitting waves, so we too as humans are walking through our days and the world emitting these waves energetically and on a brain level. But connecting with any other being we want to is not just a matter of the mind or this lump of grey matter we call our brain. It's also a matter of the heart, the wisdom of the heart, that feeling of unconditional love, and connecting from a place of kinship and recognition. Unfortunately, us modern humans have lost the ability to be aware of these things naturally. And we tend to focus only on spoken word and on language, but the animals all around us are constantly sensing us, and they know things automatically. And they have learned that us humans tend to be pretty silly about things and to think of contact as meaning physical contact of some kind. Look at how many cultures, isn't there, the shaking of hands or at the very least eye contact is some way of making connection. Because we humans think that physical contact is the only way to make connection. It's possible to connect energetically. It's really us humans who always think about things quite so physically. Essentially, by directing our attention to another being, we have the ability to tune in and to be on the same wavelength. There's no accident in that expression. It's not just coincidental to say, be on the same wavelength as someone. It really means you're resonant. That's what attunement is all about. Our ancient ancestors knew about this very well. They didn't have to wake up in the morning and sit down in front of their fire and go into a deep meditation to try to connect with the animals. They just simply woke up and thought about the lion in Africa or thought about the kangaroo in Australia and would automatically get information coming into their minds spontaneously about where those animals were. People too, when they were hunter-gatherers, used to know about the plants in these intuitive ways. They would know by direct communication with the plants which plants might be medicinal and be useful for healing and well-being, which might be toxic or which parts of the plant might be toxic, and which might be nourishment as food. And the medicine people of the tribe and the hunters and gatherers would communicate with the plants to ask them about their properties, and they would care for the plants. Our indigenous hunter-gatherer ancestors would also communicate with the collective consciousness of a certain species of animal. So if they wanted to go hunting tomorrow, then tonight they would sit in a state of prayer or communication, perhaps with the kudu nation, and humbly, through prayer, communicate with all kudu in the area, and very respectfully request that one kudu please show its tracks the next morning so they could follow the tracks because they really needed to feed their family for the next few months. They would always explain their need in a very humble way and never take more than they needed. And then about 12,000 years ago, we humans decided to keep animals behind fences and to grow crops and keep them also, keep more than we needed. And when we started hoarding and keeping more than we needed, we began to make them just resources for ourselves and not be in such a dynamic relationship and respectful relationship with them.
A really great metaphor used to describe the experience autistic people have in expressing ourselves and being understood. So that's how does it actually occur? And let's talk about the connection between how it occurs between neurotypical people and autistic people. Cassandra syndrome is an experience that occurs when a person's feelings and needs are dismissed or ignored by others, despite, in their mind, being communicated clearly. So I feel like I've communicated clearly to you my feelings and my needs, yet you've dismissed them or ignored them, potentially because you simply didn't get it or don't understand what I'm conveying to you. With just that small basic definition, I reckon it's pretty obvious and pretty easy to see that Cassandra syndrome can have a pretty detrimental impact, feelings of disconnect and lack of trust. Now, Cassandra syndrome can definitely occur in many situations. It's absolutely not exclusive to autistic people. However, it is particularly relevant in the context of autistic people involved in relationships with non-autistic people, in neurodiverse relationships.
Officially, what I do is called interspecies communication. Interspecies communication is something that we all can do, so I'm not here to be regarded as, special or having been dropped on my head as a baby. It's about us all connecting with this intuitive ability we have within ourselves. We may happen to have a particular passion for animals or plants, perhaps the trees or even the elements like the oceans. And this form of communication really applies in so many different ways.
Clearly, one of the obvious causes will be, okay, so as autistic people, as part of our diagnosis, as part of our brain being wired differently, we struggle, we have challenges with communication, with interaction, with social cues. And at times those challenges can make it harder for us as autistic people to express our feelings and needs. As a result of that breakdown, partners or friends may dismiss or ignore our feelings, our needs, which leads to frustration and isolation for the autistic person. But how does this actually happen? So we know that autistic people have challenges with our social interaction, our communication, our conveying our needs and feelings to others. Obviously, that's not where it ends. So there's that level of a challenge with the communication and interacting and understanding and conveying our thoughts and feelings and wants. But see, this is where it becomes additionally complicated because autistic people, like myself, we actually have trouble expressing, conveying those thoughts and feelings to others in a way that they understand. Now, this could be referred to as a double empathy problem. It's not just the autistic person's fault, right? If I'm conveying my thoughts and feelings and needs to you, but it's not in a way you can understand, the initial reaction would be, well, that's my fault. Well, hang on, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean? What are you trying to tell me? What are you saying? I don't get it. I don't get it, right? Okay, so that's all my fault, is it? Sure, it's coming from me, but I've got a different brain, a brain wired differently, meaning that is how I convey it. I know no other way. I can't flip the neurotypical switch. It's like changing language, putting on the subtitles. I can't just put on the subtitles for you. You've got to meet me halfway. Double empathy problem, that disconnect. I guess that's another way of looking at it from a point of view where it isn't just my fault that I have challenges with emotions and interactions and communications, but on top of that, I have challenges conveying it to you in a way you understand. So in essence, the double empathy problem is one of the main reasons why Cassandra syndrome happens in relationships between neurotypical people and autistic people, in neurodiverse relationships or neurodiverse friendships. I might not be able to do the things the way you want me to do them or convey them the way you want me to convey them, and therefore you don't really understand them, and therefore you dismiss them or disregard them or minimize them. Another cause of the Cassandra syndrome, this isn't being picky, I'm not trying to be rude, I'm just trying to say is clearly a inability or just a simple ignorance or lack of knowledge in the needs and differences of your neurodivergent partner. If your partner or friend isn't actually familiar with the unique challenges and the differences between you and them, between how your brain works and their brain works, that's clearly going to cause Cassandra syndrome. If you're not willing, able, or wanting, or if you just simply haven't taken the time to get to know autism and your autistic friend or partner, well then of course you're not going to understand them, and therefore you're going to think, well, I don't get it, like you're going to dismiss it, right? It's not going to make any sense to you, so then it's nothing relevant. And then they've just realized that you don't get them at all, you don't want to get them, you're not trying to get them, and therefore Cassandra syndrome. Keeping in mind the unique nature of Cassandra syndrome, which is when you, say, as an autistic person, feel like your feelings and needs are dismissed or ignored by others, even though in your mind you feel like you have communicated to them clearly. And on that point of not really understanding or making the effort to understand the differences of an autistic person, of an autistic brain, you have to understand that means that, well, you won't understand them or where they're coming from. And if you don't understand them, where they're coming from, how could you ever respond appropriately? Does that make sense?
Let me start with some of the founding statements that underpin our modern way of thinking, rather unfortunately. Aristotle, one of our fathers of philosophy, has implied that nature is just here for our purpose. And René Descartes, one of the founding fathers of our modern scientific system, has had very similar things to say, calling ourselves, humans, the lords and possessors of nature. And this is where we humans, well, even before then actually, this is where we began to separate from and try to regard ourselves as better than the other species. We use technology, we use our brain size and functioning as arguments to support this theory. But it's just a theory. It's just a theory that we made up, that there's some imaginary hierarchy of life, and we happen to be at the very top of this hierarchy. But no one else said it was so, except ourselves. So it hardly seems very objective, does it? At these very critical times, we know for all sorts of reasons that the Earth and our fellow beings, our wild relatives, and those that live closer to us are really struggling under the so-called supremacy of our human species. And a whole different way is going to have to be founded. Einstein was a very, very wise man beyond his mathematics and his physics. He really understood that when you take science to its limit, you eventually come up against something more. You come up against something bigger than the empirical and measurable sciences. And he knew, and we are now experiencing, that we have to invent a whole new way of thinking and being and relating to get through this evolutionary crisis. Else we're just going to drag all the other species down with us.
Neurodivergent people make great leaders, not just employees. One of the most pernicious stereotypes is that neurodivergent people are only a good fit for subordinate positions or working in highly technical or individual roles. People don't usually attend voluntary training sessions on neurodiversity inclusion with the intention to ask ableist questions. They come because they want to be allies. And yet, even among would-be allies, the typical question is, how can others, be a better leader to autistic people? Why not asking, how can I be a better colleague, direct report, or ally? This thinking can't be explained by a habit of being high in organizational hierarchy. The question is often asked by individuals who never had managerial responsibilities. This seemingly innocuous question reflects one of the most persistent stereotypes associated with implicit ableism. Many believe that autistic and, more broadly, neurodivergent individuals, e.g., those with ADHD or learning differences, can't be leaders. Prominent examples such as Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, who is dyslexic, or Elon Musk, autism spectrum, are explained away as rare exceptions. Other models of autistic leadership in business, politics, or the Navy, as well as the many examples of small business owners, are sensationalized and ignored at the same time. And never forget Temple Grandin. Her work is exceptional. Overall, neurominorities are still seen as only fit for subordinate positions or select, usually technical, individual contributor roles. Tellingly, another popular question is, which jobs are suitable for autistic or other neurodivergent people? It reveals the same underlying ableist assumption that the full range of jobs isn't suitable. In reality, there is a tremendous range of talents and abilities among neurodivergent individuals, matching the full range of jobs available, plus some jobs that never existed until neurodivergent people created them. Much of the job creation comes out of necessity. Elon Musk said that he only became an entrepreneur known for Tesla and SpaceX because he could not get a job. And so did many others. Bias against neurominorities in the workplace is staggering, with 50% of UK managers stating that they would not hire neurodivergent talent. According to The Economist, autism is a condition that defies simple generalizations, except one: the potential of far too many autistic people is being squandered. Workplace access and success barriers result in the unemployment rate of autistic college graduates in the US as high as 85%, while 46% of employed autistic adults are overeducated or overqualified for their roles. Unemployment data seems shockingly incongruous with the findings that autistic professionals can be up to 140% more productive than the average employee, and that neurodivergent traits are associated with much needed originality of ideas.
Maybe you've had this experience of having the motivation to do something, wishing you could do something, but your body just saying no. No, this is just not happening. Yes, I know you would love to complete this project or go to work today or just function in general. That would be nice. But unfortunately, body says no. It's a particularly frustrating experience when sort of our mental resources and our physical resources don't really match very well. And I think this is one of the reasons that a lot of us tend to push ourselves really hard. I know for me, if I've got the energy and I've got a project that I'm doing and something that I'm working on, I really want to just push through and push through and push through and push through until it's done. Whereas my body says, hey, excuse me, I'm still here. Maybe we can take a break now. I'm kind of a little bit tired. We've been doing this for a while. Maybe we should slow down, or maybe just take at least a little bit of a break so I can recover a little bit before we keep going and you know, on this project. And sometimes I listen to my body. Sometimes I try to listen to my body. But eventually I'll end up pushing myself too hard. In extreme cases, this looks like burnout, right? Maybe some of you have experienced that. I know a lot of us have. And eventually, body just says, I'm sorry, I tried to tell you, you didn't listen to me. I'm putting my foot down now.
So I resolved this lack of energy by completely changing my way of eating. I took out all the trigger foods, so my body had no longer any reactions to inflammatory foods. And the energy meat gives you, meat and animal fats, is just amazing, and cognitively you are online. Like, it's such a difference. when I compare this with having been a vegetarian and then afterwards a vegan, and how shitty I felt and how I had to deal with chronic pain all of a sudden, and chronic fatigue and brain fog and digestive issues and all that. So in that state you don't function well, right? So find the right way of eating for your body and you will have way more energy. However, for autistics, the environment is also a big factor, which can take away energy. So if you do your work in the right environment, then there are very few meltdowns because there is not so much stress like in an environment that doesn't fit your needs. It's that simple. However, it is really difficult to pierce through this ignorance and stubborn belief that autistics can't do certain jobs. And that is so frustrating. Without the desire to support the dignity and thriving of all humans, the business rationale for diversity is not effective. And it can even promote commodifying talent while simultaneously dehumanizing individuals and perpetuating bias. First, the lack of inclusion is a major injustice to neurodivergent people, genius-level talent or not. Second, it is an opportunity loss for organizations and our larger society. Some might say that the unemployment data indicates the need to focus on the most immediate issue, neurominority hiring. Organizations can address the leadership issue later on. However, inclusion is truly effective only if it is systemic. The lack of neurominority perspective in leadership is a crucial link in the vicious cycle of prejudice and exclusion. Without addressing all stages of the talent pipeline simultaneously, we are unlikely to see much progress in inclusion. Tackling long-standing biases requires an understanding of how these biases function. Specifically, how do people who consider themselves moral and just continue to deny opportunities to others? And why do organizations shun neurodivergent talent while struggling with a talent shortage? Myths about neurodiversity. Bias, including ableism, is persistent because several psychological mechanisms support it. Here are 3 important ways in which prejudice against neurominorities is maintained. 1. Successful careers of neurodivergent individuals are seen as an exception via subtyping. Subtyping is a mechanism that supports persistence of stereotypes by clustering group members who defy the stereotype into subgroups, such as educated immigrants or prominent autistics. Separating out people can support the idea that others are really autistic, leaving the stereotype intact. The belief that success is only possible for a few exceptional neurodivergent individuals persists despite the many examples and data. For instance, one UK study of self-made millionaires revealed that about 40% of the 300 studied were dyslexic versus 10% of dyslexic individuals in the general population. 2. Pathologizing of positives and strengths. Because of the overall negative stereotypes of neurodivergence, even positive behaviors or attributes can be interpreted as negative. In a recent study of moral behavior in autistic versus non-autistic people, autistic participants acted ethically regardless of whether they were observed, while healthy controls, meaning the non-autistic people, were less ethical when not observed. Yes, I actually work best when not observed. When observed, I get stressed out and distracted, I make mistakes, and I also get angry because this puts me in a fight-flight, agitated state. So I work best when not observed on my own. However, the authors interpreted the consistently ethical behavior of autistic participants as a moral deficit. What? A pathology? Are they out of their minds? After outrage from the autistic community, the report wording was slightly modified, but much of the pathologizing language remains. 3. Perpetuating misinformation. Another question often asked in the context of autism inclusion is, how can organizations work with someone who lacks empathy? Ugh, give me a break. An openly autistic business leader, Charlotte Valeur, was even asked, how do you deal with empathy in a board position interview? Wow. I mean, the audacity. It's unbelievable. The assumption underlying this question is that autistic people lack empathy. Still, at this day and age, the myth is still in the heads of people. It's so bloody annoying. Maybe because they lack empathy. However, the relationship between empathy and autism is complex. Overall, autistic people vary in empathy just like neurotypicals. Desire relationships just as much, and many report very high levels of caring. The key issue in interactions with neurotypical individuals is not an autistic deficit, but a dual empathy problem. With neurotypical individuals lacking empathy toward autistic people and exhibiting significant automatic bias and exclusionary behaviors. Also, I feel the need to point this out again. Studies start to come out about autistic individuals, how most of them actually have also trauma and resulting complex post-traumatic stress injury. In a society that discriminates, devalues, invalidates, gaslights, how can you not feel anxious? So you have no time or space to feel empathy if you are constantly stressed and anxious. And this is a study done on a neurotypical population, not even autistic, so even they show the same symptoms. And why? Because every human being has the same nervous system. When we feel threatened, we go into survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze in the worst case. And there is no space for empathy. You need to survive. That's all that matters. Only when you are in a relaxed, parasympathetic rest and digest state, then the empathy can come out. So, huge difference. Survival mode, highly stressed, fight, flight, and resulting anxiety, and parasympathetic state of rest and digest, then there is empathy and caring, availability, openness, curiosity. So instead of blaming autistics for not having empathy, we should look at how our society adds a lot of stress to the neurodivergent individual by invalidating, devaluing, dehumanizing, discriminating, gaslighting, and so on.
Interesting that that break was exactly what I needed. My body knew exactly what I needed. I needed to stop working. I needed to just sleep for 16 hours a day to recover from my previous weeks of putting in way too much. I needed to take a break mentally and think about something else for a while so that my mental resources could come back online and my creativity could come back online and things like that. Funnily enough, very often when I take a break from the productive work I'm supposed to be doing, all of a sudden my brain turns on with all of these amazing, incredible ideas of, oh, I could do this and I could do this and I could do this. And yes, all of a sudden the creativity is just really flowing because I'm not pushing it in this one direction anymore. I'm just sort of allowing it to be.
I just randomly looked up job burnout because for me it was definitely a burnout which happened in 2007, and from then on my health just got very bad until I could turn it around again. And now I'm very careful to never again get myself into a similar burnout, because it almost happened a second time. And you don't recover from a burnout fast. It takes a long time. So work-related stress, definitely. A state of physical or emotional exhaustion, that involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. Burnout isn't a medical diagnosis. It actually should be, especially for autistics. And what I don't agree with is that some experts claim that other conditions such as depression are behind burnout. And again, this is so typical. Completely turn it upside down, right? Blame the depression for the burnout. No, it's the other way around. There is always a reason why you get depressed. Depression is a symptom, never the cause. Otherwise, you will just treat the symptom with symptomatic treatment, some bullshit medication that never addresses the cause. So first, fix your diet. Vitamin D, B12. Have enough animal fat in your diet. Very important. Fix your gut. There is the gut-brain connection. If you eat excitotoxins, have a crappy diet, of course you will not feel happy. I can just repeat myself. For me, it was a total game changer. Removing trigger foods and adding foods that fed my gut as well as my brain. So suddenly the brain turns on. Wow. Then there might be trauma that puts you into a state of either hyperarousal, that's when you feel anxious, angry, or when you go into hypoarousal, that's the freeze response. You shut down, you feel numb, you get depressed. There you have it. When you feel ashamed, it can lead to depression. It's all the same. So, check out your relationship. Maybe it puts you into the hypoarousal freeze state because you feel hopeless. You are in a learned helplessness state because of chronic abuse by your partner. That can be a reason for depression. Depression is a symptom, not the cause. Myths about leadership. The current fast-changing environment of reinventing work presents opportunities to improve the inclusion of neurodivergent people on all levels of organizations. However, in addition to debunking myths about neurodivergence, this would require debunking leadership myths. The perception of neurodivergence as an obstacle to advancement is supported by outdated ideas about leadership. Leaders who bring out the best in motivated teams are often introverted and humble. In the context of distributed and remote work, command and control tactics become increasingly counterproductive. Yeah, it's so discouraging and suffocating and frustrating. Just thinking about it gets me so triggered. And this is not productive at all. It extinguishes your inspiration and creativity, joy and motivation. there you have it. That will lead to depression, just from the pressure and the stress. One of the most promising models of leadership for creativity is shared leadership. Excessive focus on group cohesion results in groupthink in leadership teams. Neurodivergent individuals traditionally labeled as poor fit are likely to bring original thinking and honesty to help leadership teams think more carefully, objectively, and creatively. Making the world of work more inclusive for neurodivergent leadership will require significant efforts to let go of biases and embed inclusion deep within organizational processes.
How do we fix that? Pretty simple. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. What do you want? Say that. What do you feel? Say that. What do you need? Say that. What are you thinking? Say that. This is one of the most bizarre videos I've ever recorded because everything I just said then seems so completely orthodox and normal that I find it bizarre that this is something people don't think. Are you saying I should be in a relationship with someone and just tell them what I mean and not play games? What? Tell them exactly what I'm actually wanting from them? You mean what? Not getting him to read between the lines or work out the reverse description through calculus and mathematics and science? What do you mean? Just tell them, be honest. What would the game be then? Yeah, the game would be having a meaningful, genuine, connected relationship. Another thing you could try to prevent Cassandra syndrome from ruining your relationship with an autistic person is, ding, 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 be patient and understanding. Autistic people, including me, process the world around us differently. Why? Because our brain is wired differently. If you've got a different brain, it's going to work differently to other brains. For example, if you're trying to convey or communicate something to me, and before I have a chance to process it in a different way, you may jump in, interject, or you may get offended. Are you ignoring me? What are you doing? And you don't, because you don't understand and you're not being patient. Don't jump in with a follow-up. Hold. Simple, right? But completely turns around relationships because it takes away all the pressure and the stress and the isolation. And clearly, when you develop a better level of understanding of autism, or your autistic partner, or your non-autistic partner, you become better equipped to communicate and interact with them, which therefore provides more meaningful, more rewarding relationship. Win-win. The simple act of recognizing Cassandra syndrome and then working towards creating an environment where feelings and needs are heard and respected, you can hopefully prevent the negative effects of Cassandra syndrome.
So sometimes when you have been massively traumatized and you are stuck in either fight, flight, or freeze, and constantly stressed or anxious, then a reset is needed. And there are options, and one of them is working with substances that can give you new insights and actually restore your inner balance. And one of them is ketamine.
This is the molecule. It has a ketone. It has an amine. There you have it, ketamine. The neuropharmacological effects of this are mostly on the glutamatergic neurotransmission antagonizing the NMDA receptor, also modulating the AMPA receptors, and it also has a function in the opioid receptors. Now, why is it called a dissociative? And if you take a look at the literature and at the neuropharmacology behind it, it is a functional and electrophysiological dissociation between thalamoneocortical and limbic systems. And you can imagine it like this. The thalamus is the gate to consciousness. It regulates which sensory input gets to the neocortex and is consciously accessed. One example of doing this is when you enter a room that has been painted freshly, then you smell this smell of the fresh paint, and it's not that pleasant. But the longer you stay in that room, the less and less you experience that, because it is not relevant anymore for your conscious experience. So that is the kind of the gate to consciousness that you have with the thalamoneocortical and the limbic system. Ketamine works as an anesthetic because it blocks the thalamus from giving any kind of signal up to the neocortex. That's why it's so good at keeping pain from arriving at consciousness. But while they were investigating this substance, while they were giving it to prisoners, as it was usual in that time, the subjects were experiencing and reporting experiences of floating on the universe, of disconnectedness. Others said that they felt like they were dreaming. Now, coming to the hard facts and how plasma, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and the response of ketamine are correlated. We have heard before also that BDNF might be a marker to the neurogenesis, and something that correlates when you give ketamine and do the psychometry with a MADRS score and see that the ketamine responders had also an increase on BDNF levels. So what does ketamine do? Releasing glutamate and increasing BDNF from another side might help you change the way that you see yourself and your environment. And I'm not talking about doing so within a substance experience, but in an everyday basis. Now, these are the columns where our concept lives, and it all goes under the roof of a psychotherapeutic concept. When the patient needs it, there are patients with PTSD that won't fit in this kind of therapy. They need a lot more of preparation, a lot more of integration, a lot more of trust building with the therapist. So yes, this is a very standardized way of approach, but it's just a base to modulate and adapt depending on the patient's needs. Is not a one-size-fits-all. Why don't we lean on what we have learned from the trials with classic psychedelics and use this substance with the same respect and do psychedelic augmented therapy to investigate and use the tools that we have at hand to treat the patients that really need it.
I'm saying that ketamine could be so helpful for autistics who are in distress constantly, have high anxiety, very often because of complex post-traumatic stress injury, here just PTSD, but I mean the repeated traumas, which is called complex PTSD, but it's actually an injury, not a disorder. And also many autistics have chronic pain issues. So for all these things, just having a break from life for a moment, for 40 minutes of ketamine infusion, it can be such a relief. And then it's also therapeutic for all these issues. So I hope this will be become more common knowledge.